Let's begin with the word of prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we invite your presence here this morning as we again examine the foundation of this message. We ask, Lord, that your Holy Spirit can work upon each of our hearts individually, that we can trust in you in spite of the things that we see around us. Help us, Lord, to understand these things that we study, to be able to share them with others, and that we can be strengthened for the trials that lie ahead. Thank you for hearing our prayer. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So yesterday we had taken a look at the parable of the 10 virgins, three basic positions, I guess you might say, that Ellen White that gave. So the one would have been Millerite history, the other one the general one for the world, and the other one specifically the repeat of the three angels' messages in our time. But we're going to go back now and finish off that section that we had dealing with the purification of the church. And there's just a few more spirit of prophecy statements to read. And I don't remember exactly where we stopped. I know we read the little time of trouble. So I'm just going to read some of these things. They're addressing the Sunday law. I don't think we read this statement here. And I'll blow this up. So it's kind of backtracking a little bit, but the change of the Sabbath is the sign or mark of the authority of the Roman Church. Those who, understanding the claims of the fourth commandment, choose to serve the false Sabbath in the place of the true, are thereby paying homage to that power by which alone it is commanded. The mark of the beast is the papal Sabbath, which has been accepted by the world in the place of the day of God's appointment. So it's obviously those who are understanding the claims of the fourth commandment. If you choose to observe the false Sabbath, then you would be receiving the mark of the beast in that, and especially when it's under force. But the time to receive the mark of the beast, as designated in the prophecy, has not yet come. So she's just leading up to this point there in the previous paragraph. The testing time has not yet come. There are true Christians in every church, not accepting the Roman Catholic communion. None are condemned until they have had the light and have seen the obligation of the fourth commandment. But when the decree shall go forth enforcing the counterfeit Sabbath, and when the loud cry of the third angel shall warn men against the worship of the beast and its image, the line will be clearly drawn between the false and the true. Then those who still continue in transgression will receive the mark of the beast in their foreheads or in their hands. So when it comes to the issue of, and we should all be familiar with this statement here in Spirit of Prophecy, even though this is from the Bible Training School, it's something that we've often heard, that the mark of the beast is not, the testing time has not yet come. Then those who still continue in transgression will receive the mark of the beast in their foreheads or in their hands. This is when it's enforced. So why is this? Why are we moving towards this Sunday law? Why is history moving towards this test?
The devil made him do it.
Okay. So you think it's just Satan's initiative?
No.
I'm stuck on the great controversy theme right now.
Okay, so who said no?
I did,
Okay. And why do you say no?
because they made a choice.
Okay.
I mean, yes, the adversary can present this before us, but a choice has been made. I mean, as you've been going through this, I'm looking at several other points that Mrs. White had presented. There is a manuscript 72 of 1895. In the first paragraph, She presents it this way. Who are the virgins? All professed believers. What is represented by the 10 virgins? A party watching their Lord's appearing. This parable represents real Christians who have life in themselves, and the spurious who have not the oil of grace. They profess but do not possess that character which will give them entrance into the marriage supper of the Lamb. The wise virgins have oil in their vessels with their lamps, unseen principles which reveal them to be the ones whom the Lord is acquainted with, to whom the Lord saith, I know thy works, Revelation 2:2. They have an open communion with God.
Mhm. Yeah, so if you're going to answer that question that I asked then, and you say that you disagree with that, and you just read the statement, can you put it into who do you think, why do you think we're approaching this Sunday law? Why is this issue arising? And the question of who initiated it.
Because a choice is being made.
Right. So God is the one who gives us the choice, right? So we would have to say that God is really the one leading us to this controversy, to this conflict. Because this is the gospel, right? The everlasting gospel is a 3-step testing prophetic message. And we can't attribute to Satan what really should be attributable to God.
We are presented with choice A or choice B.
Right.
Now, if we choose to follow God,
Mhm.
then we need to have that open communion. We need to have that communication so that we understand more and more of God's character. If we're not willing to understand what his character is about, then are we not accepting everything that the adversary has said?
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, we could say, this all began in heaven when Satan rebelled.
Correct.
Yeah. But as far as the test that we're approaching, the Sunday law, this is the result of the gospel given in Eden. That the seed of the woman would bruise the serpent's head, but the serpent would bruise his heel. And we know that this conflict that began in heaven is now on earth. And God has provided this opportunity in this warning message. So if God had just left the earth to itself, we wouldn't be heading for this test. But God has given the gospel, and it's the gospel that's leading us to this test of the Sunday law. Would you agree with that? Anyone?
Yes, I do.
I'm not disagreeing with it.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yes.
as I looked further,
Mhm.
Bible Echo, November 5th, 1894.
Okay.
The sad fate of the 5 foolish virgins, represented in the parable of the 10 virgins, is recorded to warn those who, while professing the faith of Christ, have become cold and backslidden. The 5 foolish virgins represent the careless, indolent, self-satisfied professor of religion. They have a calm expectation of entering heaven sometime.
Mhm.
Yet they have not purified their souls by obeying the truth. They understand the theory of truth, but have no vital connection with God. They trust to feeling and neglect to search the scriptures. They are satisfied to walk in sparks of their own kindling.
Mhm.
Now, when we're talking about sparks of their own kindling, what example do we have? Is that not Nadab and Abihu?
Yeah.
And did they not partake of wine, which we would say is
false
doctrine,
Yeah.
and come in before God where they were not supposed to. So they're drunk on this doctrine. They have fire that did not come from God. So in other words, it's word that did not come from God. Their path is lit in a strange manner,
Mhm.
but yet they stood as priests before Israel.
Mhm.
So are Nadab and Abihu an example of those that would accept the Sunday law?
Well, yes.
Sounds good.
Yeah, so one of the things is, like, we're just finishing off this purification of the church section before we get into the parable of the 10 virgins. But you can see that they're actually very much the same thing. Because really, Jeff isn't presenting a different topic, even though it has a different title. Because the purification of the church, as he's pointing out, has to occur prior to the loud cry. And that loud cry begins at the Sunday law. And in the parable of the 10 virgins, it's really about the purification of the church prior to the Sunday law. So they're really the same thing. The first and second angels' messages is the parable of the 10 virgins. So we were just finishing off this section here.
There's another there's another aspect
Okay.
too. I mean, it goes right along with what you're saying. It says his word is sharper than a two-edged sword. The word of God.
Yeah.
There's two sides to the sword.
Yeah. Yeah, and it always cuts both ways.
Yes.
Mhm. Okay, so this we're just going to finish off these statements. So we have the statement now here, the great time of trouble, from Testimonies, Volume 5. At that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince, which standeth for the children of thy people. I think we might have read this one before because I see the typo. When this time of trouble comes, every case is decided. There is no longer probation, no longer mercy for the impenitent. The seal of the living God is upon his people. This small remnant, unable to defend themselves in the deadly conflict with the powers of earth that are marshaled by the dragon host, make God their defense. The decree has been passed by the highest earthly authority that they shall worship the beast and receive his mark under pain and persecution of death. May God help his people now, for what can they do in such a fearful conflict without his assistance? So we're approaching a crisis, and I don't think that we are completely aware of what preparation is needed for that crisis. I think we don't have an appreciation.
Into that.
And the reason why I say that is I see in the conversations that occur on social media, the types of words that are spoken to others, the type of conversation that we have in our sort of casual way, that we're not fully aware of the heaviness that now exists. And I think, part of that is sometimes we make light and sometimes we see faults in others for the very reason of this heaviness that's coming or that's upon us. It's really difficult to look at reality and to face it. And that's why the world constantly is trying to distract itself from what's happening. But we have ways of doing it in this movement, from distracting from what's really coming. And what's really coming is not external, it's internal. And I'm not talking about internal within this movement, it's internal within us. The crisis that we are going to face is not something really on the outside. It's something on the inside. So let's read this next statement. I saw the four angels would hold the four winds until Jesus' work was done in the sanctuary. And then will come the seven last plagues. These plagues enraged the wicked against the righteous. They thought that we had brought the judgments of God upon them, and that if they could rid the earth of us, the plagues would then be stayed. A decree went forth to slay the saints, which caused them to cry day and night for deliverance. This was the time of Jacob's trouble. Then all the saints cried out with anguish of spirit and were delivered by the voice of God. The 144,000 triumphed. Their faces were lighted up with the glory of God. Then I was shown a company who were howling in agony. On their garments was written in large characters, "Thou art weighed in the balance and found wanting." I asked who this company were. The angel said, "These are they who have once kept the Sabbath and have given it up." I heard them cry with a loud voice, "We have believed in thy coming and taught it with energy." And while they were speaking, their eyes would fall upon their garments and see the writing, and then they would wail aloud. I saw that they had drunk of the deep waters and fouled the residue with their feet, trod in the Sabbath underfoot. And that was why they were weighed in the balance and found wanting. So that's obviously a pretty terrible situation to be in, to have known the truth and to know what the result of that disobedience to that truth has brought about. So what results from the decisions that people have made. And those decisions are being made now. They're not decisions going to be made in the future. The heavenly sentinels, faithful to their trust, continue their watch. Though a general decree has fixed the time when the commandment keepers may be put to death, their enemies will in some cases anticipate the decree, and before the time specified will endeavor to take their lives. But none can pass the mighty guardians stationed about every faithful soul. Some are assailed in their flight from the cities and villages, but the swords raised against them break and fall as powerless as a straw. Others are defended by angels in the form of men of war. I saw the saints leaving the cities and villages and associating together in companies and living in the most solitary places. Angels provided them food and water, while the wicked were suffering from hunger and thirst. Then I saw the leading men of the earth consulting together, and Satan and his angels busy around them. I saw a writing, copies of which were scattered in different parts of the land, giving orders that unless the saints should yield their peculiar faith, give up the Sabbath, and observe the first day of the week, the people were at liberty after a certain time to put them to death. But in this hour of trial, the saints were calm and composed, trusting in God and leaning upon his promise that a way of escape would be made for them. In some places, before the time for the decree to be executed, the wicked rushed upon the saints to slay them, but angels in the form of men of war fought for them. Satan wished to have the privilege of destroying the saints of the Most High, but Jesus bade his angels watch over them. God would be honored by making a covenant with those who had kept his law in the sight of the heathen round about them, and Jesus would be honored by translating, without their seeing death, the faithful waiting ones who had so long expected him. So that's a pretty early statement of Ellen White's in regard to the death decree. I saw that the two-horned beast had a dragon's mouth, and that his power was in his head, and that the decree would go out of his mouth. Then I saw the mother of harlots, that the mother was not the daughters, but separate and distinct from them. She has had her day, and it is past, and her daughters, the Protestant sects, were the next to come on the stage and act out the same mind that the mother had when she persecuted the saints. I saw that as the mother had been declining in power, the daughters had been growing, and soon they will exercise the power once exercised by the mother. I saw the nominal church and nominal Adventists, like Judas, would betray us to the Catholics to obtain their influence to come against the truth. The saints then will be an obscure people, little known to the Catholics, but the churches and nominal Adventists who know of our faith and customs, for they hated us on account of the Sabbath, for they could not refute it, will betray the saints and report them to the Catholics as those who disregard the institutions of the people. That is, that they keep the Sabbath and disregard Sunday. So, I mean, here, Ellen White, and I'm sure we looked at this statement before, or something similar to it, is placing this in the context of her time. Now, we would know that nominal Adventists refer to those that were Millerites that ended up rejecting the Sabbath. So when she's saying that they will betray us to the Catholics, we can't really literally say that it's going to be First Day Adventists that are going to do this. And that the saints will be an obscure people. Is that true of the Seventh-day Adventist Church today?
Absolutely not.
Yeah. So when it says the saints will be an obscure people, if we were to place this in our time, who would then be betraying us, and who would the obscure people be? I guess I just answered that question.
The remnant of the movement would be the obscure people.
Right. Yes. Now, in being obscure, it doesn't mean that they're going to necessarily be in few as number as we see. Because we have to believe that the number that God has given, 144,000, is a literal number. But there's a lot of people on this planet. And it's kind of hard to conceive however many billion people there are, whether it's 7 billion or whatever, it's kind of an estimate. But 144,000 is a pretty small number compared to that number of people. And we have no idea of how many people, not just this movement, what we see. We know that there are many people spreading these truths throughout the world who really have no real connection with us other than that they've been watching this movement. And for some reason, what happened there? My computer's acting up. So anyway, you can't see the screen being shared right now, can you?
Nope.
No.
Okay.
No.
Yeah, it's just like my other computer locked up, the one where I have the screen share. So I didn't do that on purpose. It's just not doing anything. Mouse doesn't move or anything on that. So I'm going to have to figure this out, what I'm going to do, unless it comes back to life. No, my other computer's locked up. Okay, so anyway, any comments on what we're reading here regarding this issue? I just have to restart my computer, so.
Well, I guess the majority of Adventism is, well, maybe I can't say that either, but I'm thinking about those who sit in the back pew of the church enjoying their obscurity. The time is going to come when they're going to be shoved into the limelight in the front before unfriendly eyes of the world. And it's going to be bad for them at that time.
Well,
and it won't be fun for us either that are anticipating it.
yeah, I mean, we know that there are faithful Adventists who are not necessarily connected with this movement, who really have been studying and searching for truth. And the same is true of Protestants. So there are many people who are following God, being obedient. They may not have come into to understanding all the things that we understand now. And that's why we have this movement to proclaim a message to Adventism. But there will come a time when those people will see what's happening and make their stand. Now, I would also say that there are many people who used to be Adventists who are still studying the truth, but do not regularly attend Adventist churches. And I know many of these people. They're studying and trying to understand the truth. I used to run into quite often when I went door to door, all kinds of people who had been Adventists, no longer go to Adventist churches, people who used to be Christians even who used to attend Christian churches that no longer attend Christian churches because they could not find truth in the organized churches. And yet, when I would talk to them about the truths of the Bible, they would understand them and actually see things in very much the same light that I saw things. So God has 7,000 in Israel that have not bowed the knee unto Baal. So it's not something that we can judge, who is God's and who is not. We're coming to the point where that is going to be made evident.
Well, I'll give you a brief story.
Okay.
20 years ago, when I was first coming back into anything having to do with the Seventh-day Adventist Church,
Okay.
there was a young family that lost their father. Now, a dear friend of mine and his family went to the funeral. Now, at this funeral were hundreds upon hundreds of other people that came to this funeral. And the pastor of the church looked at my friend and said, this guy was very popular, wasn't he? My friend looked over at him and said, well, you know what? Almost everybody that's here were at one time Seventh-day Adventist. The pastor looked at him and said, you're telling me that all of these people in this area for this service used to be Adventist? And my friend shrugged his shoulders and said, yeah, you'll probably find that there's 3,000 to 5,000 different people living in this area that used to be Adventist. And we're talking Coeur d'Alene, Idaho.
Okay.
So we're not talking a huge area.
Yeah.
Now, I've watched evangelistic series go on. There was an evangelistic series that was held in a theater in Coeur d'Alene several years ago. And there was close to 1,000 people that were baptized from that series. At the end of the year, does anybody wish to hazard a guess as to how many people remained within the church?
Probably not many.
That's always a scary number.
You want to take a guess, Patrick?
Out of how many baptized did you say?
Out of 1,000 that were baptized, how many remained?
I'm going to say about 1/10, maybe 100.
You're generous.
Oh boy,
2 remained.
that is pitiful.
Now, the problem that we've had all the way through is the message that has been being given does not affect the heart. We're dealing with a message right now on the 10 virgins, but also on the true gospel, the 3 angels message.
Yeah.
And when we get deeper into this, we're going to be addressing a message that is for eternity. It's not just for now, it is for eternity.
Amen.
Yeah. So this is the problem. I mean, to address this problem, it's rather difficult because our perspectives are limited. But I know when I became a Seventh-day Adventist, Kelly Ross is the one who I first knew who was an Adventist. It's the first person, but he had fallen away from Adventism. He had several of his friends had been baptized and had fallen away from Adventism. And, all of my experience is that very few people that I have known that have come into contact with Adventism have stayed. I would say it's probably proportional to that 2 in 1,000. And then of many of those that have stayed, they're still nominal Adventists. But I would say that out of many of these people that have had contact with Adventism, that there's a large number that still have their ear to the ground. And and of course there's some that just have no interest in Christianity, may never come back. But there's so many people who have heard the truth, have been impressed by it, but when they entered an Adventist church, thought they must be mistaken because the people here don't take what they presented seriously. And I would say the same thing in this movement is that we have many people who have followed this movement who have not taken this message seriously. And I'm not sure why. I mean, because this is life and death. And, looking around, and I don't really like to sort of judge when I see, what's happening around me, because I'm not the judge of anybody's heart. But, I've looked at some of these other groups of people who are supposedly promoting this message, and they have the same problems that we had before. And so when we're looking at the foundation of this message, we're not doing it for some entertainment purposes. We know that this is serious. And what Jeff was presenting in 1998, people weren't taking seriously. People joined themselves to this movement gradually over time. But when you can see people just turn on a dime, then you have to question what's actually happening. And what we really have to question is what's happening inside of me. Why am I here? Why am I interested in what's being presented? Am I really even interested in what's being presented? And there's just too much evidence that God has led Adventism and that he's led it for a purpose. There's too much evidence that God has led this movement, that he's led it for a purpose. For us
Amen.
to take this so casually. Now,
Even Jeff had remarked in some of his last meetings that there was really not anybody around still in this movement that started out with him back in the 90s, other than perhaps myself and Paul Charbonneau, I guess, and he's struggling himself.
yeah,
I've learned recently, but I'm all in, but I'm not a Jeff. I don't have those capabilities. I stick in here. I'm stuck like an abalone, but abalones don't do much except stick on the rock, filter
yeah.
water.
Well, the thing that I can say, like I looked at this, what is it, Army and Banners site of Caleb's, and I'm not here to sort of criticize it, but you posted that the summary of the presentation from yesterday, right? And did you see
Yeah.
the response that Caleb gave?
I haven't seen that yet. No.
Okay, so he was saying that, basically implying that we shouldn't call it our movement, that we have basically no right to do that or something, and that that you need to clarify that these are just man's opinions and Ellen White isn't making the statements. And I just thought it was, I didn't really understand the statement. Like I thought, well, what is he trying to say? Because I couldn't see anything in what you had posted in the notes, because there you just talk about this movement. You don't even say our movement. You just say this movement, because that's what we were talking about, this movement. And so anyway, then another guy came on because I asked the question, and this was Emmanuel. He's the one who, and you probably don't know this, Pat, but we had a Zoom meeting back. I'm not sure exactly when it was. I think it was actually after July 18th. So it would have been.
I read Jeff's commentary on their conflict, and so yeah, so I know who he is.
Yeah. So anyway, like he changed his last name to Champion from O'Neill. But anyway, so I didn't know who it was, but anyway, the
I
point
gradually
is,
figured out who it was by what he was saying.
yeah. So anyway, yeah. So in trying to understand this situation, what we have is people who are very aggressive. They're wanting to be heard. And yet,
Yeah, Caleb's not here, nor Emmanuel, but I
yeah,
consider both of them very much just loose cannons.
yeah. But my point is not so much about them. My point has to do with our responsibility. So my view is that my responsibility is to understand the truth for myself, to share what I understand, and to leave the results in God's hands. And everyone is in the same boat. No one of us is a leader in this movement. No one of us has the authority to tell other people what to think. But we do have the responsibility to live up to the light that we have and to speak the truth in love, right? That's our responsibility. And what we see happening in this movement, in my view, is people who are trying to be very divisive and don't recognize it in themselves. And the question that we have to ask ourselves, am I one of those? Because everything that we should be doing should be building upon the foundation that was laid. And we need to recognize that. That's one of the reasons we're examining the foundation, because we know God is giving us new light. And that new light has to agree with the past understanding of light. So it's, and I'm just getting my other computer up and running here so I can bring up these quotes. So if we are to look at the purposes of this movement, the purpose is not to exalt man. It's to give a warning message to the world. And that warning message will only be given by those who reflect Christ's character. If we don't reflect Christ's character, it matters not what we understand. Now, we know that the church has failed in its mission. And it's failed in its mission. We could argue, well, it's failed because it rejected the foundation of the message and so forth. But I would think that the main reason that the church failed is that it failed to take the message of preparation to give the loud cry seriously. That is, the church did not have a message and rejected a message that would prepare it to do that. And this movement and the individuals in this movement have to take that seriously. Because if we are not perfecting Christian character, it doesn't matter what we know or what we think. And so that's where we need to stand, is on the truth as that actually is going to change us. Now, we have this statement here then, other sheep. There are diligent students of the word of prophecy in all parts of the world who are obtaining light and still greater light from searching the scriptures. This is true of all nations, of all tribes, and all peoples. These will come from the grossest error and will take the places of those who have had opportunities and privileges and have not prized them. These have worked out their own salvation with fear and trembling. These have worked out their own salvation with fear and trembling, lest they become deficient in doing the ways and will of God, while those who have had great light have, through perversity of their own natural hearts, turned away from Christ because displeased with the requirements. Why are we displeased with the requirements?
Generally, we say they're too much, unreasonably restrictive.
Yeah,
And
well,
so people leave. We don't
Yeah.
like jewelry or women elders, such and such.
okay, well, I don't think that's really the issue. I mean, it is, but it's through the perversity of their own natural hearts. Many people will conform to conservative views, right? It's easy to look at the liberals and say they're the problem. But we actually have conservative people. And what is the issue that's really the problem? What was the issue in our movement? It wasn't jewelry and it wasn't women's ordination. What was the issue in our movement? What led to December 6th?
The theology of time setting and our obvious error.
Well, I don't think that's the problem. That's not what
Being
led.
wrong.
Yeah, but okay, so the issue was pride and envy. Was it not? Isn't that what we've pointed out as the problem?
Yeah, it's very difficult for people to be wrong.
Well, it shouldn't be.
Yeah, but it's the pride issue again.
All right, let's compare what happened on December 6th with what happened after the General Conference session in 1888 and with what was going on when Christ came to the temple.
Mhm.
What was happening? What were the priests concerned with Christ? They were concerned that others were going to follow Christ and set aside what the priests were promoting.
Right. This has always been the issue.
Okay. What was the concern of the leadership of the church in 1888 with Ellen White, Jones, and Wagner and the message that they were giving at that time?
Because they didn't want their message, which really was a message that puffed up self. They didn't want that message to be discounted.
Right. So now we are in the fourth generation, the generation of vipers.
Mhm.
And we have a church that wishes to puff up self and set aside Christ. They're not wanting to present Christ in his purity. They're wanting to present a vision of Christ, a view of Christ that is according to their own devising. So the same thing was happening within the movement.
Yeah.
But at the very basics of everything else, whether you're talking at the temple at the time of Christ, whether you're talking in 1888, or whether you're talking right now, pride, ego, and money were all at the root of the issues.
Mhm. No, and this is really the problem that each of us are facing. So we have to be very careful. I can't do anything about anyone else. To go to Caleb's WhatsApp group, and then because I wanted to go there because I wanted to see what was being discussed, because there actually appears to be some interesting ideas that Odilio presented there. Now, there's the conspiracy theory stuff, which I don't like because I think it detracts from things. But what I got from my perspective was just an attack right away, and that didn't really make much sense to me. So, from my limited perspective or knowledge of the people, I wanted to have this clarified. What is being said? But it seems to me that it's once again, people are fighting for territory. And I have no territory to fight over, right? I mean,
Yeah,
I'm on
lots of random nonsense going on there.
right. But the point is, it's not my responsibility. My responsibility is simply to understand the truth for myself and to present what I understand. If other people are going to be presenting things that's nonsense, that's their responsibility. I'm not responsible for it. That is, in the past, this movement made a mistake of trying to control what was happening. And you can't do that. For the simple reason, you just can't. It's not possible. If it was possible, God would do it. But God has never done that. Because he knows he can't manipulate, he can't control. He allows people to see the results of their own actions. He gives a message of warning. And he prepares his servants to do that. And that's what we are to do. You know, right now, I think the movement is exactly where it should be. We shouldn't see this movement as a failure. Even in its fractured state, God has allowed it to be this way for a reason. Because people's characters continue to be manifested for what they are. And we also have no one to look to. We only have God, and we only have our individual responsibility to study things for ourselves. And people are going to be trying to get followers, and people are going to be trying to get notoriety and so forth. But it doesn't matter. And you know, so that's where I stand on these types of issues. Right now, what I see in this statement that Ellen White is giving is that he has prepared, God has prepared people who are true to principle. They may not know everything that we know, but because they're true to principle, they will see truth when it is presented to them, and they will stand on the side of Christ. So in this statement here, Testimonies of Southern Africa, page 50 and 51. But God will not be left without witness. The 1 hour laborers will be brought in at the 11th hour and will consecrate ability and all their entrusted means to advance the work. These will receive the reward for their faithfulness because they are true to principle and shun not their duty to declare the whole counsel of God. When those who have had abundance of light throw off the restraint which the Lord of God imposes and make void his law, others will come in to fill their place and take their crown. Great is the work of the Lord. Men are choosing sides. Even those supposed to be heathen will choose the side of Christ, while those who become offended, as did the disciples, will go away and walk no more with him. And others will come in and occupy the place they have left vacant. The time is very near when man shall have reached the prescribed limits. The record of their works in the books of heaven is weighed in the balances and found wanting. Many who have known the truth have corrupted their way before God and have departed from the faith. The broken ranks will be filled up by those represented by Christ as coming in at the 11th hour. There are many with whom the Spirit of God is striving. The time of God's destructive judgments is the time of mercy for those who have no opportunity to learn what is truth. Tenderly will the Lord look upon them. His heart of mercy is touched. His hand is still stretched out to save. While the door is closed to those who would not enter, large numbers will be admitted who in these last days hear the truth for the first time. I saw that the Holy Sabbath is and will be the separating wall between the true Israel of God and unbelievers, and that the Sabbath is the great question to unite the hearts of God's dear waiting saints. And if one believed and kept the Sabbath and received the blessing attending it, and then gave it up and broke the holy commandment, bowing down to the sun, Ezekiel 8:16, they would shut the gates of the holy city against themselves, as sure as there was a God that rules in heaven above. I saw that God had children in Babylon who do not see and keep the Sabbath. They had not rejected the light on it. And at the commencement of the time of trouble, the little time of trouble, we were filled with the Holy Ghost, the latter rain, as we went forth and proclaimed the Sabbath more fully. This enraged the church and nominal Adventists, as they could not refute the Sabbath truth. And at this time, God's chosen, who do not see and keep the Sabbath, all saw clearly that we had the truth, and they came out of Babylon and endured the persecution with us. So that's a word to the little flock with inserts by Jeff, just to clarify the context. So we know we have this little time of trouble. We know that we have this issue of the Sunday law coming. And then we have the great time of trouble. We have the 7 last plagues, the death decree, all of these events that are coming upon this movement. So we'll just skip past here. And we want to go into the study of the parable of the 10 virgins. So Dwight, so you put together, you've been studying this topic, the parable of the 10 virgins, and you seem to have found some good statements. Now, when we go back to 1998, what do you think Jeff was facing as he began this work of presenting this message of the parable of the 10 virgins? I don't know if that's a good question to ask you, but
Opposition.
okay, so opposition. And we see that this was happening in Ellen White's day as well.
Right.
Now, we can see that a lot of times when she started to present the parable of the 10 virgins, or I think most of the time, because you put together a lot of her statements, when are most of her statements regarding this parable, when are they written?
What I'm dealing with right now is I've seen that they were written beginning about 1849, right up to the very end of her life.
Okay, but there's a concentration of these statements.
Right after the Minneapolis meeting in 1888.
Right. So we see from 1888 through to the end of her life, we actually have, and especially I see around 1900, a lot of her statements, especially where she goes into detail on the parable of the 10 virgins. Though she is always presenting it. But
Well,
I think she saw it as that the understanding of this parable was really necessary to prepare the church for what was coming.
what I have, and I'm putting it into a document to share, has been articles that she wrote beginning in the early 1890s and running all the way through the 1890s.
Yeah.
So I would hope by the end of the week I'll have this done. So far, I've only got 33 pages of these quotes ready to go.
Only, hey? So when I look at the situation, so I look at what happened with July 18th and December 6th specifically,
Right.
because July 18th led to that event. We now have, in this movement, we have a message that's being presented to this movement. And I would think that the primary message that's being presented to this movement is the parable of the 10 virgins.
I would say that that is the primary preparatory message.
Right, exactly. Because that is, in understanding this parable, everything that I've seen so far, and you can see even in Jeff's message, the purification for the church, it's really the message of the parable of the 10 virgins. Because we have this test that's been presented to us, the second angel's message, and we have to understand it and recognize what our responsibility is, what it is that we're needing to accept. And it's not just an intellectual assent, because the acceptance of this message is going to prepare us. And and I don't know how to put it because I'm just one man. I look at these statements and I keep seeing the emphasis in the spirit of prophecy on what this is about. But yet I don't see that in this movement. Maybe that's just my limited perspective, but I don't see that the movement has caught, in a general sense, the solemnity of where we are now and what God is asking us to do. So let's start looking at this section. So Adventism's parable, the midnight cry. So this is the first section. And he's going to have, I believe this one has 7 sections, if I'm not mistaken. Again and again, we didn't read this section, did we yet? I'm trying to remember. Or did we read the first section but didn't go to the second section? I'm trying to remember now. I don't think we read this section yet. No. I don't know why I'm thinking that. Oh, yeah, because we just studied some stuff. Okay, so let's read this anyway. Again and again, I've been shown that the past experiences of God's people are not to be counted as dead facts. We are not to treat the record of these experiences as we would treat a last year's almanac. The record is to be kept in mind, for history will repeat itself. The darkness of the mysteries of the night is to be illuminated with the light of heaven. The parable of the 10 virgins was given by Christ himself, and every specification should be carefully studied. A time will come when the door will be shut. We are represented either by the wise or the foolish virgins. We cannot now distinguish, nor have we authority to say who are wise and who are foolish. There are those who hold the truth in unrighteousness, and these appear outwardly like the wise. So we did look at this. So I'm trying to remember why I thought we didn't, but I don't remember why. So we can see that this is, because I remember giving an account of this, when the third angel's message is preached as it should be, power attends its proclamation. So we went through this statement, and it becomes an abiding influence. It must be attended with divine power or it will accomplish nothing. Yeah, so we did read this. And we read that. So I'm trying to remember what we had not finished.
You know, I've been highlighting my own copy of this.
Yeah. Okay.
And I got highlights up through page 59, about halfway through the page.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah. So I had a mental lapse then. So it's somewhere around here.
Yes.
Okay. The message, behold, the bridegroom cometh, was not so much a matter of argument, though the scripture proof was clear and conclusive. There went with it an impelling power that moved the soul. There was no doubt, no questioning. Upon the occasion of Christ's triumphal entry into Jerusalem, the people who were assembled from all parts of the land to keep the feast flocked to the Mount of Olives. And as they joined the throng that were escorting Jesus, they caught the inspiration of the hour and helped to swell the shout, "Blessed is he that cometh in the name of the Lord." In like manner did unbelievers who flocked to the Adventist meetings, some from curiosity, some merely to ridicule, feel the convincing power attending the message. Behold, the bridegroom cometh. So there was a power attending this message that even unbelievers felt the convincing power of. And I would think that this is true of this message, though many in the movement don't realize it, of how powerful this message is in what we're saying. The angel who unites in the proclamation of the third message is to lighten the earth with his glory. A work of worldwide extent and unwanted power is here brought to view. I'm pretty sure we read this one. The Advent movement of 1840 to 44 was a glorious manifestation of the power of God. We read this. The message was to be carried, as was the midnight cry. This message will be carried, as was the midnight cry of 1844. not so much by argument as by the deep conviction of the Spirit of God. The arguments have been presented, the seed has been sown, and now it will spring up and bear fruit. The publications distributed by missionary workers have exerted their influence, yet many whose minds have been impressed have been prevented from fully comprehending the truth or from yielding obedience. Now the rays of light penetrate everywhere. So this is an important statement. Yet many whose minds have been impressed have been prevented from fully comprehending the truth or from yielding obedience. So this goes back to what we were reading earlier. Are there many people who have been impressed with the truth? And the question is that were, how were they prevented from fully comprehending the truth or from yielding obedience? What was preventing them, even though they were impressed with the truth? Think about 1,000 people who were baptized.
The truth is so different from what people live day to day in the world. It really requires a radical change of worldview. And most people, even though they see the truth, are not ready to make that kind of radical change that it requires.
Yeah, but this is not what this statement says. It says they were prevented. So how were they prevented?
I was going to say they're prevented by their own inertia.
Yeah, well, I don't think that's what this is saying, though. Because when the rays of light penetrate everywhere, these honest children of God sever their bands that have held them. So who prevented them? Or what prevented them? Even though they had been impressed.
Well, she's
impressed.
Other people.
speaks elsewhere of family ties, and I suppose it would come to employment or whatever. Maybe they're part of some kind of group that's holding them back.
Okay, well,
Bonds, basically.
yeah, I don't think that is the issue here that she's presenting. Because we have people whose minds have been impressed, but have been prevented from fully comprehending the truth or from yielding obedience. So something is preventing them. And I would say it's an external force, not an internal force.
Yeah, you can say that too.
Okay, somebody else had a comment?
I was saying that it could be their own Seventh-day Adventist church minister or Protestant minister.
Okay,
Putting pressure on them.
Right, so there's people around them, and sometimes it can be the church itself. So you think about 1,000 people who are baptized, and only 2 end up staying. Now, we could obviously attribute some were just caught up in the excitement, but there must have been, for people to go through the step of being baptized, they obviously had their minds impressed. But I would say that, people ended up going to church, and those are just my opinion. I wasn't there and I don't know all the cases, but I've seen similar things. I've seen people become Adventists and not last for Adventists long, not because they weren't interested in what was being presented, but because the people, the Adventists themselves, had really prevented them from fully comprehending the truth by the very fact that they're not living it. So if you hear one message, and now you go to a church and you see that the people there are not interested in what had just been presented to you, I don't think it's likely that you're going to stay long. And I believe that God has been allowing these people, these honest children of God, this opportunity. They may have been impressed with the truth, but they didn't fully comprehend the truth. They're not necessarily responsible because they haven't obeyed it fully. Now, often, and I've seen people do this, if they present the truth to someone and that person doesn't accept it, they believe that the fault is always in the person. can you ever imagine that maybe the reason why somebody doesn't accept the truth is because of us?
Yeah.
Definitely. If they're not being fed and they're not going to be shown a good example, because I stayed in the church because somebody was wise enough to nurture me and to hand me the books. When I started reading those books, when I learned about the health, I just decided this is for me, and I've kept on since then.
Well, if it wasn't for Beverly Fanmiller, she was an old lady in the church, at least she seemed old when I was 23. She was in her 60s, I guess. But if it wasn't for her taking the time to study with me and my wife and other new members, I wouldn't actually have known the truths of Adventism. I mean, I don't know how long I would have stayed in the church, because what was around me was very non-Adventist in a lot of ways. I mean, I was never attracted to Adventism, not attracted to the culture of Adventism. Definitely don't like Adventists generally. They're not my kind of people. So the only reason I ended up continuing to be an Adventist is because I was not just impressed by the truth, but I came to understand it. And I allowed that truth to change my life. And I didn't really worry about the people around me. But it's not very common, because people don't know the truth. They don't fully comprehend it. They don't have this opportunity. Other people mistreat them when they come to the church. And I've seen many people mistreated. And they just don't go to church again. But it doesn't mean that they weren't impressed. And it doesn't mean that they still wouldn't be impressed again when that message is presented as it should be. Because there will be a power attending it. Now, I'm pretty amazed that you can have 1,000 people baptized and only 2 still remain. In some ways, I'm amazed. But based upon the conditions of our church, I'm not amazed. And in my ministry through the years, I've only ever brought one person into the Adventist church, who actually, became a member, of people that I studied with. And I studied with lots and lots of people and ministered to lots of people. But I never sought to make someone an Adventist, because I didn't really feel that the church was the place for them. I mean, it's a difficult place to be. Now, if they chose to have to follow the truth and do it and become an Adventist, that would be fine. But I never tried to seek to make people Adventists. And I believe that those people are better off for that. Now, maybe pastors might think that that's wrong, but I just think that we bring too many people into the church that are unconverted, and the church suffers because of it. So anyway, we have this statement. Now the rays of light penetrate everywhere. The truth is seen in its clearness, and the honest children of God sever the bands which have held them. Family connections, church relations are powerless to stay them now. Truth is more precious than all besides. Notwithstanding the agencies combined against the truth, a large number take their stand upon the Lord's side. So this is the point that we're working towards. The purpose of this movement, the reason why this movement doesn't believe in public evangelism, is not because we don't believe in saving souls. It's because we do believe in saving souls. If we bring people into this movement and they are not ready for the problems that exist in this movement, if we bring people into our churches and they're not ready, we're bringing them into a quagmire. We're presenting before them a stumbling stone. The labor that we need to do with individuals is presenting the gospel and to live out the gospel in our lives.
Even Jeff himself said our message was incomplete. That's why he wanted to stop the public evangelism.
Yeah.
But like you said, the part of the incompleteness is that we're not bringing it into our lives anyway.
Right. Yeah. I mean, saying the message is incomplete. We know that Jeff laid a solid foundation because it was God that laid that foundation. It wasn't really Jeff. God led Jeff in his study. And that foundation manifested, just like it did in Millerite history, the second angel's message. So Jeff laid the foundation with the first angel's message. Then we have the second angel's message, which is since 9/11. Let's just simplify it that way. And so now this movement has come to a point in which it is going to have to proclaim that second angel's message to the world and to Adventism, right? First to the Levites. And then we will be prepared. So there's a preparatory message before the third angel's message is to be empowered. And we have to recognize that our message is it's incomplete on some levels, in how what we understand. But the primary problem is, as you point out, is that we are not prepared. If we were to bring people into the movement and we're still manifesting the characters that we do, we're going to be corrupting them rather than helping them. As Jesus said about the Pharisees, you search sea and land to find one proselyte and make him twofold time a child of hell than ye yourselves are. And I think that's true of Adventism, and I think it's true of us as well.
Amen. Even Jeff was trying to say things about character development later in the process.
Well, I think Jeff's message has always been about character development, because this is 1998. What's Jeff talking about here?
Right.
He's talking about character development all the way through. Everything he was presenting, as far as I'm concerned, was character development. I saw angels hurrying to and fro in heaven, descending to the earth, and again descending to heaven, preparing for the fulfillment of some important event. Then I saw another mighty angel commissioned to descend to the earth to unite his voice with the third angel and give power and force to his message. Great power and glory were imparted to the angel, and as he descended, the earth was lightened with his glory. The light which attended this angel penetrated everywhere as he cried mightily with a strong voice, Babylon the Great is fallen, and is become the habitation of devils and the hold of every foul spirit and the cage of every unclean and hateful bird. The message of the fall of Babylon, as given by the second angel, is repeated with additional mention of the corruptions which have been entering the churches since 1844. The work of this angel comes in at the right time to join in the last great work of the third angel's message as it swells to a loud cry. And the people of God are thus prepared to stand in the hour of temptation, which they are soon to meet. I saw a great light resting upon them, and they united fearlessly to proclaim the third angel's message. Angels were sent to aid the mighty angel from heaven, and I heard voices which seemed to sound everywhere. Come out of her, my people, that ye be not partakers of her sins, and that ye receive not of her plagues, for her sins have reached unto heaven, and God hath remembered her iniquities. This message seemed to be an addition to the third message, joining it as the midnight cry joined the second angel's message in 1844. The glory of God rested upon the patient, waiting saints, and they fearlessly gave the last solemn warning, proclaiming the fall of Babylon and calling upon God's people to come out of her that they might escape her fearful doom. Now, we've read this statement many, many times. So Ellen White here is placing this repeat of the second angel's message in the future. Jeff is looking at this as being the Sunday law that's coming. He's not seen 9/11. And we know that the message Babylon has fallen, the second angel's message, is repeated. Now, a question that has always question that I have, when it comes to I don't know how to put the question. Okay, so this is an addition to the third message. So we know we have the second angel's message. And the second angel's message prepares for the third.
But like we said already, there needs to be a new second angel's message to make way for the third again.
Okay, so
Yeah.
so in Millerite history, for instance, let's put it this way. Where did they think the third angel's message was? Because they were preaching the first angel's message, they knew that. And when the second angel's message came in 1844, they knew they were proclaiming the second angel's message, correct?
Yes.
So
I don't see that they knew it.
well, they said, we're preaching the message Babylon has fallen, right? So they knew they were preaching the second angel's message. When did they think the third angel's message came into play?
Did they even comment on the third angel's message in the Millerite time? I don't think they did.
See, so this is the question. I haven't seen it where they talk about the third angel's message. So now, when they were giving the second angel's message, and they do say they're giving the second angel's message, the question is, why are they not looking at the third angel's message? Why are they not seeing where they are in the line of these messages? And what does that mean about us now? What does that tell us?
The third angel's message caused Hazen Foss and William Foy to stumble, and only Ellen White got the idea clearly, but even that till much later.
Okay, yeah, so anybody have a good answer to this question? And understand what I'm asking? Because they seem to understand that they had given the third angel's message. Fear God, give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment has come. And then when the second angel's message came, they seem to have understood that they were proclaiming the second angel's message. You understand what I'm asking? So what does that mean for us?
Well, evidently we have to re-give the second angel's message also.
Okay, I don't know if people understand the question I'm asking. So I just looked up in the periodicals, Heinz Signs of the Times, the True Midnight Cry, the Daily Argus, the Advent Mirror, the Jubilee Standard, and the Advent Testimony. And I don't get a single hit for the third angel's message. So what does this tell us about the Millerite movement? And what does it mean for us? Why wouldn't the Millerites Why would they acknowledge their proclaiming the first angel's message and also then the second angel's message, but expect Jesus to come back before the proclamation of the third angel's message? How could that be?
I would think that God, in a sense, held his hand over that third angel's message until
Right.
after
Yeah.
October 2nd.
Yeah,
22nd.
you can't see what you can't see. Right? You can't
Yeah.
know what you can't know, what you don't know.
They're already bypassing the 7 last plagues and looking to October 22nd.
Right. So now we are in a situation. Can we say that the same thing happened to this movement? Not necessarily the third angel's message, but that something has been obscured to us and that this is in God's providence.
It has to be something beyond just our momentary infatuation with time setting that drove us into the stone wall of July 18th.
Well,
There's got to be more than that.
I don't know what you mean by a momentary fascination with time setting.
Well, in
And
the
I wouldn't
last
call
couple
July
of years.
18th, I wouldn't say July 18th is a wall. I mean, I wouldn't depict it that way. That wasn't my experience, but
Yeah, that was pretty much my experience.
okay.
And Jeff's too.
Okay.
Only Jeff hasn't survived.
I don't know if Jeff hasn't survived. I mean, he purposefully has stepped out of the picture because he doesn't want to make the same mistakes as Miller.
And yet he ended up making the same mistake as Miller anyway.
What mistake was that?
Well, he's rejecting the idea that there is any future life, and he's not staying on board to see if what happens.
Okay, I didn't see that with what Jeff said.
That's good.
Yeah, because
I didn't see
what I saw Jeff say is that he wasn't going to settle this issue for us.
And I saw the neutrality as very dangerous for him.
Yeah, I didn't. I saw it as exactly what he needed to do. If Jeff had stepped in, I don't think it would have been a good thing because he didn't have neutrality. He
But
was
even if
he was compromised, and he knew that.
Yeah, but he could have just stayed present, and that would have been helpful.
I don't think he could have, and I don't think it would have been helpful. I disagree. Now, I may be pretty hard on that point, but I think that's something that we need to see. If we're going to understand where we are right now, we have to see that God led in July 18th in the time setting. That wasn't some momentary sort of infatuation with something, but this was actually God's direct leading. That would be calling what happened in Millerite history a momentary fascination with the 2300 days or the 2520.
As a question,
What's that?
as a question, would it have benefited the disciples for Christ to have remained present and returned after, or excuse me, before the time of Pentecost? I think the disciples had a lot of learning. They had to come to an understanding of really what Christ had been teaching them for so many years. And until they had to examine this for themselves and not have the reliance upon Christ, they could not have for themselves the true heart conversion that was necessary before Pentecost.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we're in a similar situation. too many of us have had great reliance upon exactly what Jeff has said, and we have not been studying on our own to determine what we really believe.
Mhm.
We, before all of this happened, July 18th, how many of us could have defended what we were saying and done so without making a great reliance upon what Jeff was saying or what others were saying? We have to be able to give this for ourselves, because it's not Jeff alone that's going to be called in front of judges, prelates, and others. We are all going to be called to give an answer for the faith that is within us.
Mhm.
And how can we answer for something when we don't know what it's about? That's been the whole crux of the issue within the church.
Mhm. No,
Because
yeah, this is
Go ahead.
exactly the point, because when Jeff acknowledged that July 18th paralleled October 22nd after July 18th, he took that position, but he chose to step out for the very reason that it paralleled it. Correct?
Agreed.
Yeah.
That was his reasoning, but I disagree with it.
Well, I think it was God's reasoning. I'd be careful to disagree with it, because as Dwight has pointed out, if Jeff would have stayed, people would have just followed Jeff, and we would still have the same people, most of those people who have actually rejected the message, they would still be in the movement if Jeff had endorsed it.
Well, I don't argue with that. That's
Yeah.
true.
So it had
But July 18th was never the focus of Future for America from the beginning. It
no,
was
but
the
it's
Sunday law.
right. But it was
I think
the
we
law.
lost our focus.
Yeah. I don't. I think it was the logical conclusion of everything that Jeff ever presented. July 18th was a culmination of the message. That's the position that I take, based upon the reason. If you look back at how July 18th came about, it didn't come about as the result of time setting. Now, it may appear to that on people who are on the outside, but everything that pointed to July 18th was already established prior to any time setting in this movement. The work done on the book of Ezra, the work done on Samuel Snow's letters, the work done dealing with the book of Daniel, Raphia and Peniam. All of the groundwork was done. And the reason why July 18th was accepted and November 9th were accepted wasn't because we decided to all of a sudden time set and came up with some dates. The reason why those were accepted is because the groundwork had already been done. And when those dates were presented, we found that they fit into the structure that was already established in God's word, in established truths. And that's why Jeff accepted it, because he saw the overwhelming weight of evidence. He saw that Samuel Snow's letters testified to July 18th. And he couldn't shake it. He saw, and he even plainly stated, that that is the direction that this message had always been pointing to. The only problem is, just like the Millerites, we had a misconception. What was the misconception of the Millerites?
Right, you'll have to answer your own question there.
Well, you know the misconception of the Millerites. I mean, Ellen White plainly says it.
The earth was the sanctuary.
The earth is the sanctuary. Now, if they had understood that the sanctuary to be cleansed in heaven was the sanctuary to be cleansed in connection with the 2300 days, would their experience have been the same?
No.
No,
So did God allow them to have that misconception?
Yes.
yes, he did.
Okay. So what was the misconception of this movement in regard to July 18th?
I think it was just about Islam, and that was about it.
Okay, so because we had, three different options. We were right as far as the time, but wrong as to the event. We were right about the event, but wrong about the time. Or we were wrong about both the time and the event. Of course, the one that we were right about the time and the event is impossible, so we don't include that. So there would be four, but obviously based after July 18th, we had three options. Now, I took the position that we were correct as to the time, but not as to the event. That is,
I tentatively agree.
yeah. So the event, the reason why we were focused upon that event was because there was a great deal of evidence to point to that event based upon what we saw. But I saw before July 18th that we had some lines that we had not seen. And this had to deal with the 777 structures, that there was this structure that was part of our structure that showed that we were in the line of failed predictions, dealing with going back to the Mayan calendar, September 23rd, 2017, November 9th being a failed prediction. All of these failed predictions showed that July 18th should be a failed prediction, but that wasn't heeded. And the main reason, I believe, that the main thing that we failed to see is that our movement was, which we should have known, is we should have known our movement is paralleling the Millerite history, and that we were confused in regard to the lines and where we were in the lines. Because if July 18th had been fulfilled as we imagined it should have, we would have been completely in the wrong place, unprepared for the task that was to be given us, because that cannot be the beginning of the loud cry. Why not?
Yeah, we weren't ready for World War III and the final events for sure.
And the message really had to go to the church first, right? This movement is not a separate movement from the Seventh-day Adventist Church. This
We
movement is
pretty well lost the ears of Adventism already.
right, and we're a part of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. The message that we are to give is to be to Seventh-day Adventists, because without the Levites, this movement would have gone nowhere. Now, my belief was that if the event happened, that this movement would be dead. Jeff said basically the same thing. If the event happened, or whether or not it happened, that was the end of FFA. And the reason he had that is because he saw that if this event was to be fulfilled, that FFA would not have the ability to carry that message, that message had to be carried by someone else. So he understood the limitations of this movement, because he understood the people in this movement and their limitations. What we didn't know is how limited we are, and we're still limited. None of us are great talents. None of us are great minds. None of us are great leaders. We're just people who happen to be accepting the truth at this time. And our responsibility is not to have some great movement, some great organization, but to live the truth as powerfully as we can, and to study and understand that this movement was ordained by God, and it's still going to fulfill its purpose. The movement has not ended, even if FFA has ended, because if we really look at Millerite history, we know that July 18th parallels Samuel Snow's last letter with its publication date, but also with its purpose. Our movement, what we experience, precedes midnight on the line of the Levites. And however long this is going to take, this movement was set up by God to accomplish this work, and it will accomplish this work. It's just not doing it in the way that we wanted it to be done. And so we have to be really, really careful on how we look at July 18th, because we can't look at it as anything other than the natural progression of this message. And it's still an extremely powerful part of this message. Just like 9/11. If you reject 9/11, you reject this movement. If you reject July 18th, you reject this movement. And if you took that position, I would see no reason for a person to be even a Seventh-day Adventist. And I keep running into this. So I don't mean to trample over you, Pat, so much, but I run into this all the time. People who were in this movement writing on my different Facebook groups, that we were wrong. July 18th was a mistake. And I think that we have to be really, really careful in the language that we use, because I don't see any failure in what has happened. I see failure of man in their understanding, but no failure in what God has done in laying the foundation of this movement, and also in leading the movement in the way that he led it. And for Jeff, I think Jeff is one of the wisest people I know. His decision to step out of the picture was very, very difficult. I don't think it was easy for him, but he knew it was necessary. And I don't think that we should judge his decision based upon our desires. I would much rather personally be able to write Jeff and ask him all kinds of questions, because there's lots of questions I have that only he can answer. But in his wisdom, he has chosen not to do that. And I respect him for it. So anyway, we went a little bit over time, but I thank everyone for the response, and Pat, for your honest response to those questions. And forgive me if I was harsh with you. Hope you didn't take it that way.
Well, no, I've got a lot to think about. I've never had crystal clear conceptions of what was going on, so I can't say that I know everything.
Yeah, well,
Just following along, trying to see whether light coming out.
Well, I definitely don't know everything either. So, so it's just my opinion based on my experience. But also, I think if we look at Millerite history as our guide, we have to accept that God led. And we've seen it in studying the foundation of this message. So let's close with prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are very thankful for the time that we had here today to study these things. We know, Lord, it's difficult for us as we look at what's happening around us, to not feel that sense of discouragement at times for the hurt that exists in other people's lives, for the decisions that are being made. And we know, Lord, that we only have control over ourselves. We ask that you can help each of us to look deeply into our own hearts. Help us to endure these trials as good soldiers. Help us to stand for you in spite of ourselves, in spite of our weaknesses, in spite of our failings. Help us to cling to you and to your promises. I pray for each person again who is studying these things, who's participating. You know, Lord, the hurt and pain that has grasped and held onto our hearts so many times, with the disappointments and discourages in the world, and what we see happening in our friends and our families. But we ask, Lord, that you can prepare us for the trials ahead, that you can help us to cling each day to you. Thank you for hearing our prayer. Bring us together again to study. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.